We are live. Hello, hello, and welcome to the Literary Roadhouse Book Club. Today we're discussing Sing, Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. I'm Anais, joined by our regular hosts, Gerald Hornsby and Colette Sartor. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm so excited for this discussion.
Yeah.
Me too.
This is so much book.
Oh,
A lot of book.
yeah.
A lot of book.
I know.
We're going to be here for a couple of hours.
We went from a fairly thin book, even though it was more pages, to a very heavy book, even though it was significantly fewer pages.
Oh, yeah.
So, overall impressions. Colette, what do you think of the book, and was it what you expected?
I loved it. It was not what I expected because I did not read anything about it beforehand. And I didn't realize how much magical realism was going to be in it. I love the mix of the real with the magical realism. It was so beautifully balanced. It was gorgeous. And I loved the prose. The characters were fascinating, and I loved that horribly fated romance between Leonie and Michael. I did not expect that at all. And there was something about that just made me ache, because it left no room for anyone else, and yet it felt so real. It really, it was beautiful. The whole book.
Yeah. Gerald?
Yeah, I went into it cold. I hadn't read any reviews or any blurbs or anything. I just went straight into it. And at first I was thinking, I don't like this sort of italicized whole other story thing. There seemed to be too much of it. But wow, once I got into it, it was I really, really am going to read it again, because there's so much to it. And as I said in a comment earlier on, if for me not liking George Sanders's novel, this was just in a different league for me. It was really, really good.
Yeah. I love this novel as well. And all I had seen before was little blips here and there, little headlines, so I knew it was going to tackle racism in the Deep South and things like that. I had no idea about the magical realism or the ghosts. And so much so that part surprised me so much that even when Leonie was seen given, to me, it was like, okay, she's just hallucinating. It's, she's just high all the time. It wasn't until Richie appeared that I was like, oh, we're going all in. It wasn't a ghost story until Richie is in the car, and I'm like, okay, this is happening, and this is great. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So this book is driven by the arcs of characters both living and dead, or unburied. As readers, we have a full, nuanced view of each character, but the characters are not afforded this view of each other. How do you guys think that tension drives the story? We can start with Colette again.
I loved. It creates so much more tension, because to see JoJo's perception of Leon motivates her, and she could have come across as such a cold, indifferent, abusive mother. And then we go and I have to be honest, the first time we went into her POV, oh, I'm not really interested in this character. And yet without being in her head, she would have been so one-dimensional. And so to go into her head and to be able to see, and the thing is, it's not as if going into her head makes us see how much she loves her children, how much she wants. She's not that character. And yet being able to see her perspective made me care about her in a way, or at least empathize with her in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise. And it also gave me a much better understanding and made her relationship with Michael feel more real. And it made me at least more sympathetic to who she was and why she just wasn't able to be that mother that the kids needed. And why and to see that commitment to Michael, Michael's commitment to her, that it made all of that so much more real. So it made all of the characters more rich for me, and yet let them feel real to each other, because they couldn't see that about each other, because that's real. We don't see very often, especially a kid like JoJo's age, who needs so much from a parent figure and can't get it. For him to have had any of that insight would have felt false. So the fact that they don't have that insight into each other makes their circumstances more real to me.
Yeah. And also for me, it just made me feel like, if only you guys could see, like, if I wanted this aha moment so badly. Like, I wanted, because JoJo's getting to the age where he might be able to understand this. He just turned 13. He's getting a bit older, and it's a lot to ask of a 13-year-old, but given the circumstances, right? It's like, oh, I just want him to learn this, and he never does. Even at the end, when Leonie fulfills her mom's wishes at the end, and he's so mad at her for doing that, and I'm just like, no, you don't understand, like, and that never gets resolved.
Yeah, and I thought particularly with JoJo's relationship to Leonie, I thought the bit at the end when Mam was talking to him and trying to tell him why Leonie was like she was, I thought that was really insightful and really quite a great parting gift for someone who knew that they were going to die but seemed so truthful to her. And I agree that I found the swapping of points of view on a strict chapter by chapter basis didn't feel clunky at any time. And really, really valuable. And Colette, you're absolutely right with Leonie as a character who you just didn't you formed an opinion of her, but getting inside her head just changed that completely. And yes, far more sympathy than I had before for her, but still not liking her, but understanding a little bit more.
And what an important service for us as readers to have had that insight, because we might hear about or see or women like Leonie exist, and JoJo's view of her from the outside is similar to the view that most people will get, whether they're a child or not. And it's refreshing to have our own views of that type of woman challenged. Like, going into Leonie's point of view, I think, was really important in not just understanding why this character is the way she is, but because this novel is touching on the sort of the shared Black experience, racism, and everything like that. Just a little bit like, there's a lot of things piling on here, more than the things you think you know at a cerebral level. Like, yes, people are aware of racism and the legacy and everything like that, but just seeing it actually manifest from her own point of view with her own thoughts, I think, was still an added layer of understanding that's also a service for us, the readers.
Oh, yeah. I agree. I think it's a great point.
Yeah. And I think one of the characters that most people see for the most part accurately, and yet still there's secrets, is Pop. Right?
Oh, I loved him so much. I loved him. And he was the one without some special sight. And yet he held the key to so much.
Yeah. He didn't need to see in order to just know. Like, and he just had that faith. He knew there was energy in things. He's the one who told JoJo that, even though he's never seen it, he's never heard it.
He believes. It's that element of faith, which is so difficult to have for so many people. And yet that's where his faith lies. He knows his faith lies in the energy. Well, that's part of the reason he's with Mam. You know, because she does see, and he needs to have a simple faith. After everything he has seen himself in the real world, I think he needs that simple faith in something else.
Yeah. And everything he's seen and everything he felt compelled to do, like the whole thing with Richie. Oh
my God. Yeah. And you know, the funny thing is, with a story like this, when we know early on that a main pivotal character keeps telling the same story over and over, but never gets to the end, we know that he had to have had some horrible role in whatever happened to Richie. And yet I never would have predicted that.
No.
Right.
No.
So I knew, like, and that creates its own driving tension, because we want to see that ending. We have to see that ending. it needs to be paid off. And I knew something horrible was coming, but I never anticipated that because Pop is built as such an empathetic, protective character of everyone around him.
Mhm.
And yet his form of protection for Richie had to take this horrible, violent turn.
Yeah.
And we see why in his mind it could only go that way.
Mhm.
And it was just heartbreaking isn't even the word. I feel like there's no word to describe how that made me feel.
Mhm.
And so beautifully written as well to have to have Richie there in the background while he doesn't just say to Jojo, well, this happened, that happened, that happened. He little by little it's teased out with bits from Richie. You just think, yeah, and you're taken along with that the way that he discloses what happened. And you're not sort of looking at your watch thinking, come on, get on with it. You're just thinking, yeah, the tension, it's all there. Beautifully done.
Yeah. And so moving to Richie. So for me, the story really took a turn when Richie joins sort of, I guess what you call like the road part of the story. Like he joins the car. And once he joined the car, I wasn't 100% sure of where this was going to go. He kept saying he needed to find River to get answers. And yet he gets those answers and he doesn't go home. It's not settled for him. And yet the other Restless Ghost that we're following, Gibbon, does leave. So even though he doesn't get an answer, there is no answer for Gibbon really about his violent death. They're both senseless, but Richie still had a mysterious element to it. At whose hands did I actually die? He finds out it's River. He can accept or reject that it was a mercy killing, but he doesn't leave. So what did you guys make of that? Like, why some ghosts stay and some ghosts leave, and how does that tie back to the themes?
I don't know. It's the short answer.
So, I kind of felt like Given could leave because his role was done. You know, he was there. It wasn't necessarily senseless death, but in accompanying his mother, you know, being there to accompany his mother to her own death, his job was done and he could be settled and he could cross over. And I felt like with Richie, nothing ever was going to be settled because I feel like for him, home, which is what home, to leave, to be able to depart as a ghost, you need to home means. And for him, home meant the protective love of River. And their violence committed against him, couldn't settle him. That could never settle him because all it meant was that his life was just violence. You know, his life on this earth was violence, and therefore he remained tethered to it. Is that the answer I'm supposed to come to? Honest, I don't think the book readers. It's just the answer that's so funny. And in so many books, I feel like they're trying to lead me to a certain place and I need to find that. I read a lot of thrillers, so usually that's true. You know, there is an answer. In this book, I feel like the beauty of it is that we can come up with our own answers for why one ghost can leave and depart and feel settled and the other one can't. And you know, then at the end, when there's that whole tree of ghosts that Kayla can soothe. And I wasn't even sure if they departed. I felt like she just soothed them because I went back and read the ending again before we talked today. I'm like, oh, because when I first read it, I thought, oh, I guess she let them leave. And I realized, no, she didn't necessarily. You know, so maybe it's all about, maybe some can leave and some can't.
I think your point about it coming down to what we think it is really important. And for me, it's almost like, I wonder if it just has to do with love. Given was much more loved than Richie ever was. Richie's upbringing was just, I mean, they both had poor upbringings, but Richie's was also a lot more violent. He had to turn to crime at a younger age. It's not clear that he received any love from his mother. I don't think there was a father figure in his life. We're given his death was tragic, but he still got to die as Given. I think there's this sense of like dying as yourself. There's like a parallel between Richie and Mam. In both cases, in Mam's case, Leonie is helping her die so that she can die as herself. And Richie, River kills him so he can still die as himself before he's flayed and tortured and torn bits by bits in the way that Blue was. So, like, I wonder if there's something about that. Like, if you were stripped of your dignity, your sense of self, if that's a different kind of violence, that's the more racial component that makes it really difficult to leave. And if you got to die, even if it was violent, but still knowing yourself without being degraded in that way, I wonder if there's like that like there's two kinds of violence. There's the physical violence, and then there's the violence of like the self, the identity.
That's a great point. You know, I want to go back. I'm actually turning pages in the book right now because I want to go look at what Jojo hears from the people in the trees. Because you remember that before Kayla comes, and it's so gorgeous because you start hearing what he can see in their eyes, you know, about why they're still there. And I think you're right. I mean, if you look, he raped me and suffocated me until I died, to put my hands up and he shot me 8 times. She locked me in the shed and starved me to death while I listened to my babies playing with her in the yard. I mean, all of these things, they're violence against self, and there's some element of the self that you're not necessarily dying as yourself. And I can see that. Whereas you're right, and also, quite frankly, you're right. Given was loved throughout his life.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a solid family. Richie never had any of that. So in essence, did he even have a chance to find that self?
I don't think
and maybe, and maybe what he felt like, maybe the reason he was coming back to see River was because that was the one person he felt like he had found himself with. So to see himself, even though it was a mercy killing, maybe that was something he couldn't accept because he couldn't find his sense of self there because he felt betrayed.
Yeah. And he had a strong sense of self, right? He wanted to play football. He wanted to do the bow and arrow. He had such a strong sense of self. Who was, you know, you could even say overconfident given the reality of the racist South that he lived in, because he was warned, like, do not go on a hunting trip with your white team members. And he was like,
and he did anyway.
Yeah, because he thought it was different. And that's heartbreaking, because of course he thinks it's different, because on the surface it looks different, but it's not.
But it's not. Well, that goes. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just wondering. So we're talking about Richie, and why did he need for Pa to tell Jojo the story? Because he knew the story. He knew, Richie surely knew the story of his death, so he didn't need to hear it from River, did he?
No, I thought Richie didn't know. I thought that was the problem, that he had somehow that was the one part of his life he couldn't see. So every time he burrowed under the ground and came back up, he was trying to find that aspect.
So maybe he wasn't aware, right? Because the death was so quick. So he was leaning up against the tree when River came across him, and then River killed him. But it was so quick that Richie didn't know what had happened.
Exactly.
That would make sense. Thank you. Yes, I understand now.
Yeah. So Richie wanted that answer. When he got the answer, it wasn't enough, right? Yeah. Oh, it's so sad. So we were just saying that Given thought things had changed, but we know that things only change superficially. A lot of that racism is still there. And Richie, as a ghost, he sees Parchman, which is a real Parchman Farm, is where the Mississippi State Penitentiary is. So he, as a ghost, sees Parchman change over time. A lot of that Parchman history is steeped in like research that Jesmyn Ward actually did. He describes it as like a change shedding an old skin, a superficial change with the same creature inside. And he also describes time as an ocean that everything happens all at once. So that's another way in which things don't really change. They just sort of change superficially, but at their core are more or less the same. So what does this analogy say about incarceration and racism in the South?
Wow. That's a big question.
I mean, it's a pretty depressing thing, it says, really.
Mm.
Well, I mean, I think it says exactly what we think it says, which is things don't change. And this is such a great segue, because I feel exactly what Given's death proves, which is that, this is how many years after Richie's death and Richie's incarceration, and Given is this superstar. He's this gifted, graceful. He's one of those people you think he's an anointed one. You think he's going to walk through life and just have this beautiful life, but he's living in the deep South with deep racism that hasn't fundamentally changed. So there's a veneer of change. There's that snakeskin of change, but it's shedded as soon as he is in the woods with weapons and white men who are inherently racist, and they take the first opportunity to kill him. So it says things change, but they don't. And we're living in a time period that, unfortunately, and not to bring up politics, but we are living in a time period that unfortunately is proving that quite true. And so it's to be living in a time period where we're being revisited by things that I, as a very privileged person, have been able to think, oh, things are changing, and then to read this book and to see this book reflect the times that we live in, it's hard, it's difficult.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing, because when I first started reading it, I couldn't place the time period. It's the whole way that the family lived seemed, decades and decades ago. It could have been sort of in any time, and I don't know if there are any other clues going along. But then about halfway through, or maybe a bit after, there's the bit where Michael had come back from Deepwater Horizon after the accident there, the drilling rig. And strangely, we just watched the film the other night, and you think, oh wow, this is like now, this is contemporary.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. You're right. I couldn't place it. Yeah, I couldn't place it at first. And there was something, it's funny, in any other book that wasn't as masterfully written, I probably would have objected and thought, oh, I wanted this placed in time more quickly. And here I'm like, no, I kind of liked that feeling of this could be any time. I didn't kind of like it. I really liked it. And up on the clues of when this was actually happening, I was fascinated, and it set a really lovely tone for, this is not going to be what you expect. Be on your toes. And even early on, so we don't really know what time period we're in necessarily in the beginning. And then we've got Jojo being able to literally understand everything the animals say. And you can take it as a kid emerging into adulthood. He's still a teenager. He's on the cusp of up, and as well, who's growing up, and he's musing that he can hear this. But you can also take it as he actually hears them. And so either way, she's laying the groundwork for the magic realism that comes later. She's setting us up, even if we don't want to take it that way at first. And just from a structural standpoint, it's so beautifully done.
Yeah. And not having a place in time reinforces that point that time is all at once, that it is an ocean.
Yes.
The past is still here haunting us. It's all the same. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. It really is.
Yeah. And so you were earlier talking about Leonie and Michael's relationship. So Michael is the cousin of the guy who shot Given, who's Leonie's brother. Like, there's this whole convoluted thing. And so the first time that Leonie sees Michael, she says, he saw me. He saw the walking wound I was and came to be my balm. So that was after Given was murdered. And later, Michael has that big brawl with his family. He wants his family to accept his Black girlfriend and their kids, and his parents won't. the mom wants to pretend she will, but she just wants to grandbabies, is my sense. And and the dad just won't at all. And he leaves his parents' house and he chooses Leonie, right? So how does guilt, desire, taboo, defiance, and grief work in their relationship?
You're asking some big questions today.
Wow. Big book. There's so much book here.
Yeah,
it's such a big book.
Wow.
Yeah.
It seems to be everywhere. It's a really dysfunctional family, and the fact that you have that dysfunction and this sort of quirkiness and oddball living conditions to us anyway, in more affluent white communities, with Michael away, and then Michael coming back doesn't really change the dysfunction. It adds like another dimension to the dysfunction, and it's kind of strange that Leonie doesn't see everything that everyone else sees, and she tries to do makes the potions and never quite gets it right, and doesn't quite remember what they're supposed to be. So she's like an outcast in that family, because she's very different to the others, in the way that Pa was really. But he was embedded in the family.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Well, I felt like, what drew the two together at first, she needed to be seen by a world that had killed her brother. And he needed to assuage his own guilt for being part of that world. And you'd think that, and it does end disastrously in that they wind up addicts together. And yet there's something about the fact that they actually managed to hold on to each other and love each other, which I found really surprising and beautiful. It's tragic that what they're doing is really, feeding each other's addictions. But I felt like for something that felt like actual love to grow out of, guilt, and to grow out of guilt and to grow out of despair was really beautiful. Because what surprised me most of all about this book was that I actually believed those two loved each other, and that it may have started out as a desire to be seen, like a fierce desire to be seen and recognized by a world that had killed her brother. And on Michael's part, it felt like it really was guilt. He needed to assuage his own guilt by embracing the sister of the man who his family killed. But there seemed to be a real love there that just surprised me, and humanized them. I felt like without that genuine love, they would have just been pathetic addicts, and they weren't.
Yeah,
but then again, it's bad parents, because she doesn't have
they're both bad parents.
Yeah, they're both bad parents. She doesn't have the mothering instinct in her. Michael, the day after, a couple days after he gets out of jail, tries to make bacon and just loses his temper. Basically entry level toddler tantrum. He has no patience. He's not mothering instinct either. And yeah, I believe they loved each other too. And I wonder if part of it also from Leonie's perspective is does it make it feel, because it's got to be hard to live in a society that discounts your brother's death, discounts his life, lies openly, knowingly, with a wink about why he died, and then to feel like everyone sees me the same way, and then to have someone from that family come out and see you differently might, in a way, just take the institutional oppressive part of Given's death and soften it just a little bit. It has a tiny bit of hope to it. This was tragic and everything, but it can be those specific people suck. It's not that everyone here is rooting against my family, my son.
That's an excellent point. And yeah, and because think about it, it's not just, that's such a great point, because it is the institutional, it's not, she's not just going and finding some random member of that family who she wants to love her. It's the son of the sheriff. You know, it's the son of the law who decided that and knowingly decided to call this an accident, even though it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so, and it's also a little bit of a fuck you, quite frankly, if you excuse my language. But it really is.
Yeah, that's the defiant part.
Yeah, it's defiant. And that actually made me really happy, because I wanted that. I wanted, yeah. Yes, it is very much so for both of them. So it is the perfect pairing of disasters, you know, because they both are disasters in their own way, and they feed off each other's penchant for addiction, and they don't really have another solution as a salve for their own grief over what they've seen in the world already. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a way for her to say, it's not everything that hates me, because I found this one person who's part of all that who loves me.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that the writing is so good that it could have been this falling in love with a member of the family. It could have stood out as such a cliche, and like Michael is trying to atone for the behavior of his whole family. But I felt like it was done so subtly, and even the bit towards the end where they go to his parents' house and have that big argument, and the fact that he decides to go back with Leone and the kids, it's just really nicely done. It's very subtle, the way that he thinks about it, and he knows what he's doing, and he understands what this stance is that he's taking, and yet he takes it because they have got such a strong bond. And I think the sort of the dysfunction, it would be easy to make that a cliche, to make the, you know, and I mean, I thought all sorts of things were going to happen on that journey up to the prison with the children, and I thought Kayla, you know, she was definitely going to die at some point. But it was so gently done, and it's strangely, it's a nice story. You know, it's a very hopeful story.
I think, yeah, I hear what you're saying, which is like, it has a lot of violence, it has a lot of racism, a lot of gruesomeness to it, and yet there's moments of tenderness. The relationship between Jojo and Pop, Jojo and Kayla, just like, you know, or even Leone and Michael's love. They may not be great parents, but they do love each other. Like, there's all these moments of tenderness, of real love, of real support, or even, you know, Jojo and no, not Jojo. I was going to say Given and Leone's relationship. The way that Leone aches for him, the way that she even is a little jealous sometimes of the fact that her kids still have each other and she lost her sibling. I did some research, and Jesmyn Ward lost a brother. She wrote a memoir in 2013. There's a lot of sibling bonds, grief of loss of siblings in her work, and you see it in this one especially. And so she lost a brother. So it just makes it like that much more like painful when, you know, you read it, you see it, and you know that the author is talking from a place of lived grief, very specifically, just like this.
Well, you know, just as a little aside off of the reference to her memoir, I have a friend who's just a voracious reader, and he considers Jesmyn Ward one of the great writers of our time. And he said, go back and read all of her books, you know, in chronological order in which she wrote them. And he said, and finish with that memoir. And he said, it gives you such insight. He said, her literary legacy is so rich already. He said, she's just such a tremendous, she's young, and she's such a tremendous writer. And he said, and then to cap off reading all of her work thus far with reading her memoir really gives you real insight into her work and into, he just said it's a great way to really explore her writing and the themes that resonate there, and to have that memoir is a real gift because it gives us further insight into what drives her as a writer.
Yeah.
So it's something to think about. I've already started doing it. Like I started her very first book after I finished saying Unburied, saying, and I'm going to work my way through the way he recommended.
Yeah.
When was her first book released?
Oh, I have to go back and look. It was, yeah, I'd have to go back and look because I did this a while, like after I finished Sing Better Sing, which I raced through. Gerald, you said you're going to read it again. I have to read it again because it's one of those books I can see myself reading at least once a year because it's so gorgeous. And I learned something as a person and I learned something as a writer reading her. I mean, she's just such a tremendous storyteller and writer.
And she deals with such big subjects in such a sort of delicate and subtle way, and it is so well done.
Well, it's the specificity of her world. It's funny. I was teaching a class the other day where we have guest lecturers come in, and it's an intro writing class, and the guest lecturer said, the way you write universally is to write specifically. That's the way you can attack universal messages. The more specifically you write about the world you've created, the more universal themes can emerge. And it's so true. And I feel like the specificity of Jesmyn Ward's worlds are what allow us to see universal themes. And I'm looking, Salvage the Bones was her first book. And I'm just looking to see when it was published. About this book. There we go. Oh, this is one that won the National Book Award. Gotta love that. Jesus. She's just amazing. No, I can't find it. I'll find it later.
It's funny. We were talking here about big pictures and small stories, and because we've got it's Remembrance Sunday over here today, where we particularly remember the people who died in the First World War, and the First World War is such a huge, enormous story in itself. But when it comes to where it comes to life is when you pick out the individual stories, and we near to where I live now, there's a statue to a guy who got a Victoria Cross, and when you look into the story, it's so rich. There is so much to this individual story. A tiny one person out of millions who died, but it's that specificity within the world that brings the story to life.
Oh yeah.
And as I read this novel, I kept thinking a lot of Toni Morrison's Beloved, and apparently a lot of people when I was reading reviews, everyone was like, it has echoes of that, right? The child ghost from your past that's haunting you, who has a lot of resentment. But Jesmyn Ward says that actually the bigger inspiration for this was As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, even though it's sort of that story in reverse. So As I Lay Dying, it's taking the dead to a place to rest. And in this one, you're bringing the dead back with you so that hopefully they can rest. And in Richie's case, does not. But it has that road story element to it. Most of the story takes place on the road. And it's funny because earlier, we were saying, we expected something to happen to Kayla or like something bigger to happen. But isn't it wild? Because so many things happen on that road trip. It feels like we expected something bigger to happen because it's a novel. But transplant what actually happened to real life. Nothing. I've done road trips in my life. Nothing even close to any of that happened.
Not even close. Not even close. It was I didn't anticipate the road trip. So when it came, I was so on edge. I was also convinced, Gerald, that's it. Kayla was going to die on that trip.
Yeah.
And I love that she didn't, that she defied my expectations. She, the writer, because so much more could happen because of that. So much more that felt real and true to this particular story. And what needed to happen in the rest of the story. And that allowed Richie to be found. The fact that it did not even occur to me that something like that could, who would know that you would go back and get the ghost that you're, going to the penitentiary to pick up your father. You're going to get the ghost that needs to see your grandfather. It was fantastic.
Yeah. And I thought that bit where this hog came running out and Kayla slips and bangs her head on the dashboard, and you think, oh no, here you go, this is it. But no, she's just okay. She cries and then she's okay, and you think, but at no point do you think, oh, that was a trick, because we can see it happening. It's so, you're right in there in the story of what's happening on this road trip, that you're not surprised by anything that happens. It's just, yeah, these things are happening to them.
I mean, both of the kids' lives are put in danger because Jojo is cuffed and has a gun pulled on him. He's a 13-year-old boy. It's wild. The only person who doesn't get cuffed is the white woman and the literal baby toddler girl. Like the 13-year-old boy getting cuffed and having a gun pulled on him. Both parents have gotten cuffed, and it's just a sense of like, you know, I didn't think the gun would go off, but
yes,
it could, you know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it could have. Well, and the sad thing is, it's a sad commentary on the times we live in, that we weren't surprised that the 13-year-old boy was going to be cuffed. That we just actually anticipated. It was a matter of what was going to make that cop cuff him.
Yeah.
You know, what surprised me was that Michael actually got cuffed, and I realized, well, of course he did, because he's a felon or whatever he is. Is he a felon? Yeah, I guess he's a felon. Anyway, he just got out of prison, so of course he's going to get cuffed.
Right.
But it wasn't at all surprising that Jojo did, you know, and it was a given.
The 13-year-old black boy got cuffed and had a gun pulled on him. It just,
and I was actually waiting for Kayla to be cuffed, to be honest, because it was that kind of, it's like only, but she was, again, the writer was smart. You don't go that far, because then it makes it feel like melodrama.
Yeah.
Right.
And it never did.
Don't get cuffed. There's a line. I guess the line's at around 10. I don't know where the line is, but yeah.
I mean, yes, that could happen. You know, I could see that happening in real life, but in a novel, you really have to walk that line of, even if there's some news story out there where a 4-year-old got cuffed, if you put it in a novel when all this other stuff is going on, that might be the element that pushes us over the edge and says, oh, no. That went one step too far. So there was always that nice, beautiful balance between that made me feel like, oh, yeah, this all feels inevitable. This is what needs to happen in this story.
Yeah.
Even the ghosts, even Given being there, even Given helping his mother over to the other side when Richie wanted to be the one, which was such a terrifying and eerie battle. I didn't know what to expect from that.
That scene was wild. It was loud in my head.
Yeah.
Yes, that's such a great description. It was loud in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't understand Richie's endgame. I think he was trying to make Mam unsettled with him. I think he was trying to take Mam, like so she wouldn't be able to cross over. And Jojo has like this power to break that spell because Given couldn't push past whatever fields Richie had put up. That whole thing, like when you just sort of go all in from like magical elements, believe it, don't believe it, to like we're just gonna turn in all the dial 10 on supernatural.
Yeah.
I call it supernatural LARPing, live action role playing. Like that's what I call it when people think about like we're just gonna go all in on that. We're gonna go. It's wild. Like she just did that and then goes right back to the same mood as before. I thought it was a great climax.
And she keeps the world going by bringing us to the tree, by having Richie still coming in and out and having Jojo, because the world is all, that other world is all now so much more heightened for Jojo now that he's helped Given get his grandmother through. So he sees the snake and he keeps seeing Richie and I love that Richie can't get in the house. He's in the tree and it's all just so wonderful. So that when we finally get to that tree and Kayla works her magic and soothes the ghosts, we're all in. Yeah. We completely have bought into this world.
It's really funny. People who listen to the weekly podcast would know that, especially going back to the early stages, I had a real problem with magical realism and I couldn't get to grips with it. And yet there was such a strong narrative to this story, to this novel, that the elements of magical realism were dropped in little by little and to that final sort of almost battle scene. And you're just all in. You're just accepting it all and you're just saying, that I can understand this. And you're just reading and enjoying what she's writing. Very nicely done.
And it just did feel like suddenly she turned up the dial.
Yeah.
And then turned it back a little bit. Yeah. Which I thought was well done. Yeah. And so going back to Kayla at the end, that power that she has, I really like the description where as Jojo's looking at her doing this, it's her eyes, Michael's, her nose, Leonie's, the set of her shoulders, Pop's, the way she looks upward like she is measuring the tree, all Mam. But something about the way she stands, the way she takes all the pieces of everybody and holds them together is all her, Kayla. I love that. I just thought like the way that it's just like, again, hopeful. It's such a book that could just be dark, depressing cry, but it isn't. It ends on a hopeful note. And she's carrying all of these different parts of her history, including her white father, the Black mother, who is sort of rejecting a lot of the teachings of her very spiritual mother, the very rigid, by the book, straight-edged grandfather. It was great. She's taking all those pieces of all of these people and making something new and hopeful. I liked it.
Something new and hopeful and powerful. Because out of everyone, because Mam felt so powerful, even though we really only see Mam when she's dying. And Jojo, we have seen Jojo's power, and we've seen Leonie has power that she doesn't know how to use, and that she's, like Gerald said before, she's constantly misusing because she just never gets herself there. Yeah. She's never really in one world or the other. But even as powerful as we've now seen Jojo is, Kayla feels like she's going to be even that much more powerful in a different way. And she's only 4.
Yeah.
And she seems to have an understanding that nobody else but Mam had, which is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a really lovely bit between Kayla and Jojo where he's talking to her without speaking, and she seems to understand about the sucker little lollipop thing, and I thought that was so cute and so beautifully done that they've got this bond going, this communicative bond going, that don't need words, and Kayla has settled and said, yeah, okay, I know I'll get it soon.
Yeah. It's and their whole bond, they were always on each other. They were like physically like this constantly. For those who aren't watching live, visual aids are not good on a podcast. Yeah. I just thought it was, just because at the end, Jojo is the one who's able to help Mam cross over to the other side, and Kayla's the one who sues the ghost. They both have this power, but it's like there's like a duality in them that I don't quite understand. Like if there was a sequel, and you can't have a sequel to this book because then the whole thing would be like the soothing of ghosts, which might be too much. Yeah, it would be too much. But if it were, they would have some kind of like brother sister like ghost soothing outfit going on. It almost feels like a comic book, right? Like but I'm wondering at the end, why Kayla singing at the end and why not Jojo? I don't know if there's an answer. There's just a part of me that's like, I don't know. I don't know why I have that question. Like, I'm just like, what is it about Kayla? Is it because Kayla looks more mixed? Because JoJo's very dark? Is it supposed to, is that part of the hopefulness? I don't know if it's that pithy.
I don't know. I felt like it's because that's her particular power. And if you look, it's so interesting because it says, so Kayla begins to sing a song of mismatched, half-garbled words, nothing that I can understand, only the melody, which is low but as loud as the swish and sway of the trees, that cuts their whispering but twines with it at the same time. It was almost as if she's in enough of a childlike state that she understands the wordless melody that is necessary to soothe the other world. And JoJo's past that point. I mean, I don't know if that's correct, but that's what seemed like to me in that moment. And also, like I said, I feel like that is her power. Yeah. That's something that will grow with her as she gets older. And we do. And something I love about this book is that just like in real life, where we all have different gifts that we capitalize on, in this book, in the other world, they all have different gifts. And like you made the point beforehand, Anise, that Mam has her herbs and she has her potions, and Pop senses energy, but he doesn't really have any special connection with the other world, and they all have something different, and it's what they make of those gifts. Yeah. So that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also part of it is what you were saying. She's still young. She's still connected to it because Richie is the one who always sees. He's in and out of seeing that world, of seeing the singing, the world across the ocean. So let's actually talk about symbols and themes because water, the lack of water, mud, snakes, crows, talking animals, beasts. These things were recurring over and over and over and over in the novel. And for me, set a really cool mood. But what did it all mean? Like, what? There's so much water.
So much water. I mean, I wish when I was in graduate school, I had the chance to take 2 literary Bible classes. Like one was Old Testament, one was New Testament, taught by Marilyn Robinson. And she's just this phenomenal biblical scholar. And I did not take them. Well, I signed up for them and got credit for them, but never went. And it really depresses me because I look at this and so much of this is the biblical references and the talking animals. And I just don't know those references. The lapsed Catholic that I am. So.
I mean, water is something that is often, it's life comes from water. You can be born anew, you're baptized, you're in water. And a lot of, what the lack of water is always in the story, the parts of the story that are just the bleakest. So Mam is described as she's dying with her cancers being very dry, her skin looking like dried mud. Parchman, literally parched man. That whole farm is a lack of water. It's thirst. And then when you die and you want to find your home, you have to go across an ocean. And Mam, who's spiritual, is referred to as the saltwater woman. And Pop, who is so nurturing, is literally called. His name is River, right?
Oh,
so
yeah. I'm so amazed that you brought all that together. Because I was aware of all those elements, and yet it didn't occur to me to bring them all together. And that's such a beautiful through line to look at in the book.
And it's just such a different, because this author is so poetic. And it's just to sit there and think this through and plot this. Like a lot of literary novels will sometimes sort of, I don't know, pick 1 or 2 things that were intentional, but this one just had so many, just so much. How do you sit there as an author and plot out all those symbols and having that divide, like water and lack of water, and a lot of things to do with the mud and being low to the ground. River smelled like a lot of things that were low to the ground. It just felt, I was just like, how do you plot all of these things and keep it throughout the entire novel without forgetting? I felt like if I did that, I'd put it in the chapter I remembered to put it in, and that's it.
I feel like she's such a masterful storyteller that I wonder if, I think so much of that comes along with the plot and it's instinctive. And when she writes that, and this is just my guess, but when you write that first draft, you go back and you realize, in the 4th or the 5th draft, you realize, look at these elements that exist. I want to heighten them because they're starting to take on a life of their own. And I have a feeling that stuff isn't necessarily there from the beginning. It's not like the intentionality is there as the book progresses. And I think it develops with the plot and the characters, those thematic elements. Because I feel like if you start out as a writer aiming for that symbolism and aiming for those themes, you start writing archetypes. But if you start out writing specific characters with specific goals and yearnings and desires, eventually that symbolism and those themes bubble up to the top. And then when you put on more of your writer's cap in later drafts, can say, I need to capitalize on that because this means something to my characters. So I think it probably happened in stages. But she's just such a masterful storyteller. And my guess is, now that I'm going back to the beginning of her work, is that there are certain themes in here and symbols that probably recur. Like you said, with the deep bond between siblings. Yeah. That definitely, I can already tell when I went back to her first book, but that's there.
Yeah, I can see what you say when if you sit there and think, what am I going to write about, and what am I going to put in as an underlying theme or an underlying token symbol, and if you start off writing, thinking water. It's just you're just going to be hammering the reader. And it may be that this thing was in her subconscious somewhere at the back, maybe with the Deepwater Horizon thing out in the ocean, and maybe something there, and she was writing, and they said, "Oh, look what's happened." The theme of water is appearing, and then you can sort of add extra bits into it. But it never feels clunky.
Yeah,
never.
And there's some authors where like those things that appear over and over and over are very marked across different works, and some authors where it's not. So I always think of Haruki Murakami. If you read enough of his work, you're like, and there's the talking cats again. Like it's just like certain notes he's always gonna hit. Androgynous characters that are in customer service. That's another one.
Really?
Yeah, librarians working the reference desk that you don't know what gender they are.
Wow.
There's just like certain things that like will reappear. Didn't Maya also say once? I can't remember what it was, but she was like that she noticed in her own writing, she had a lot of people either looking in mirrors or looking out windows. I forgot which one it was, but she was like, why do all my characters do this? And she realized one day while she was editing. Yeah.
You start to discover your own recurring issues.
Yes.
Discovered. But actually there's a really long piece that I read somewhere that was about Haruki Murakami, and it was like basically like ding 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 ding, this is a Murakami book if you have these things.
Oh, that's very cool. I love that.
Yeah, because Murakami is like very pronounced in that. Fog is another one. Just constant fog. But yeah, so I think you're right. A lot of it just sort of happens. It's just instinctual, and it's so like heavily spiritual. Like,
yes,
the books just feels. I don't know. It made me feel like if this book had a soul, that soul is very full. And you know what I mean? Yeah.
And when another little thing when it comes to the magical realism and the fantastical elements of the book, that world felt very real and very rich. It's funny when you talk about books and when you look at books that have that element of otherworldliness, a lot of times you're like, well, what are the rules of this world, and are they cohesive, and are they, do they work? And I feel like all those symbols and all those themes, part of the reason they're so rich is because that's a very well thought out other world. Like I never felt like I wondered what the rules of the world were, how things worked, because as the world developed, the rules all felt like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. And part of it was, quite frankly, because as much as I make fun of myself about, I'm a very lapsed Catholic, I was raised as, from a small child as very strongly Catholic. So I do know the religion quite intimately. And because I've got that connection to religion, all of those elements just felt natural. Mm-hmm. And I felt like she built this world on an existing basis of religiosity that really helped me understand it and helped it feel cohesive, and helped the symbolism kind of bubble up and just feel organic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh wait, one more shout out, because you were mentioning upbringing and stuff like that. Actually, so she mentioned other gods and stuff. One of the gods that Mam mentions is Yemaya, which is the Orisha goddess of the ocean.
Yes.
No.
And I knew that one because of Cuban Santeria stuff that my grandmas are like into. So
really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Old Cubans, old like Latin Caribbeans, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans. Yeah, there's a lot of that. And there's all like these different sects. They would never say it's Santeria. They call it Espiritismo. It's the same thing. But they have different names for things. In Puerto Rico, there's Mesa Blanca. Yeah, it's the same thing, everybody. But
oh, I love that.
Yeah, so when I saw Yemaya, I was like, I know that. Yeah, and again, water.
And that was so, and I love a powerful woman. I have to say, I love that was a powerful female goddess. Yes.
Yeah. So it sounds like we all loved her writing, or maybe I'm speaking. Gerald, did you love her writing?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because I was surprised. I read some reviews that were like that sometimes it was too flowery or it was overwrought or too poetic. I was like, I didn't get that at all.
No. I'm actually surprised, because that's something I really loved about this. It was poetic, but a lot of times I feel like, especially in literary novels, the lyricism goes on for the sake of itself. and doesn't necessarily serve any other purpose. And I feel like this had such strong characters and such a strong narrative drive, and the language fed into that.
Yeah. You know, although I will say one thing that I had to get used to is the way she would break up her own dialogue. Like somebody would say something and then she'd describe something and then somebody responds to the thing that the person said, like on the other page. And I was like, wait, okay, that conversation's still happening. That happened to me a few times.
I agree. That happened to me a few times too.
Yeah. Okay, so we're hitting the hour. I only have one more little comment. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to touch on?
Oh, we've touched on so much.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I have to say I'm stealing from the Atlantic review of the book, because after I read the book, I was like, oh, okay, what are people like saying? I'd like to get a sense for it. Okay, in this review, my mind was blown. So the novel starts with Jojo making a bold claim. I like to think I know what death is. And he's saying this because they're about to go slaughter a goat for his birthday meal. So it was great because the whole novel is Jojo actually learning what death is by the end of it. And it starts with him thinking he does the slaughter of the goat. I thought that was beautiful.
That is beautiful. Yeah. I didn't think about that.
And you reminded me, I think it's going to be one of the great things about rereading it, is because the character of Leonie, about, the sort of the care she doesn't bring to his birthday, and she doesn't get a cake, and that sort of slapdash way that she has, that approach to mothering is such a clear sign there, and it's sort of only when you've read the novel and you understand the novel and you go back and you think, oh yes, that was we knew what she was then.
Yeah.
I like that,
yeah.
But and in terms of the goat, and you're right, that's such a fascinating, he spends the whole book discovering what death actually is, and yet in the beginning he thinks that he does know.
Yeah.
And that's such an interesting, I want to go back and read the book again with that in mind. And if you think about it, part of the reason he thinks he knows what death is because he can speak to the animals. And so he can hear what it means to them, and he sees different sides, and it's just a part of life, but it's a part of the life he sees in front of him. He doesn't yet know what lies behind it. He doesn't understand the other world that gives him the ability to hear the animals. And it's really fascinating. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, no, I didn't either. Now it makes me want to always go back and read the first paragraph of a book when I finish it.
Good point. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah. Because I'm sure this happens a lot. So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, this is a great discussion.
Yeah.
This was so much book, and it's only 285 pages.
It's amazing that it is such a short book, because it left me with so much. I had such a strong emotional response, and I just had, and it leaves me feeling very full in a beautiful way.
Yeah.
It's a heavy book.
Yeah. So next month, we're reading the 2018 Man Booker Prize winner, Milkman by Anna Burns. As you read the book, let us know your thoughts on Twitter with the hashtag LRH Book Club, or join our discussion group on Facebook, the Literary Roadhouse Readers. A link is provided in the show notes. So I've prayed to all the gods and collected cow, parsnip, cornmeal, river stones. Surely now I'll collect a bounty of iTunes reviews. Help us reap the harvest by leaving a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, we don't want to become podcast ghosts. Help the living at patreon.com/literary roadhouse. Every bit helps. Like $2, $5, whatever you can do is great. Okay, great discussion.
Thank you very much.
Milkman. Thank you.
It's going to be a hard one, apparently.
Oh, great.
Can I say sorry in advance?
No.
Yes, you can.
All right.